Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Timothy Lay and I'm the Analysis Manager here at ACLED, the leading source of data and analysis on global conflict. I'll be moderating today's session where we will be discussing ACLED's new report, The Battle for the Borderlands, how the Tehreek-i-Taliban Pakistan, also known as the TTP, is challenging the state's control. As many of you know, the TTP has once again emerged as one of the biggest national security threats in Pakistan, and it is only getting stronger. This comes just a decade after the Pakistani military announced phenomenal success in its fight to eradicate militancy in the tribal areas bordering Afghanistan. Although the group is not yet back to its heyday as it was in the 2000s and 2010s, our data shows that the TTP activity in 2025 already exceeds that of all of 2024. With much written of late regarding the TTP, this report delves into the data behind its resurgence. It unpacks how the TTP's tactics have evolved through strategic civilian targeting and propaganda efforts to exploit local grievances and allow the group to challenge the state's control in the KPK's tribal areas, positioning itself as an alternate center of power to the Pakistani state. Joining me today, we have the author of this report, Pearl Pandya. Pearl is ACLED's new South Asia senior analyst, who previously worked as an India researcher and South Asia research manager here at ACLED. Prior to joining ACLED, Pearl also worked on international law and human rights at the UN and in local politics in India. Welcome, Pearl. Thank you very much for this important piece and for taking the time to walk us through the report's findings. We're also lucky to have Zia Rehman on the call. Zia is an independent Pakistani journalist and researcher who's contributed to the New York Times, Dawn, and myriad other outlets, while also advising policy institutes on security, governance, and regional stability. We are very pleased to have you here, Zia, joining us today. After Zia and Pearl's remarks, we will also have time for your questions. Several of you have already submitted questions and we'll try and get to those as best as possible. We also invite you to ask any questions using the Q&A function here on Zoom. With that, Pearl, how did the TTP get to the stage where it is once again Pakistan's biggest national security threat?
Thank you, Tim. And if we could move to the next slide, please. So the Pakistani army dealt a massive blow to the TTP through its Operation Zarb-e-Azab, but through a combination of international, domestic, and organizational factors, the TTP has been able to stage a remarkable comeback. Its resurgence has coincided with and benefited from the return of its ideological namesake, the Afghan Taliban, across the border in Afghanistan. And as you can see in this visual, there's a clear escalation in TTP activity from August 2021 when the Taliban came to power. UN reports suggest that the Afghan Taliban provides the TTP with monetary support, material support. It has a permissive environment to operate in now. And of course, we can't discount the moral boost that the Taliban's success has given to the TTP, showing it that it is possible to make gains through a protracted insurgency. Besides this, organizational reforms under the leadership of Noor Wali Mahsood have played a key role. Mahsood took over as emir in 2018, and since then he has really focused on consolidating factions under the TTP's umbrella and promoting internal discipline. Internal political schisms within Pakistan, which has been embroiled in political turmoil over former Prime Minister Imran Khan's ouster, haven't really helped matters. His party, the Pakistan Tehreek-i-Insaf, continues to be in power in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, where the militancy is concentrated, and its differences with the national government and the military have come in the way of a unified approach. Just yesterday, the chief minister resigned, or rather was forced to resign, and it looks like differences between him and PTI chief Imran Khan, former chief Imran Khan, on how to collaborate with the military in addressing militancy and showing greater provincial autonomy may have played a part. So it is within this changed geopolitical environment that the TTP now finds itself, now operates in, and its objectives have also shifted in line with these changing dynamics. They now have a much narrower focus, more or less on imposing Sharia and restoring semi-autonomy in Pakistan's tribal belt within Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. This semi-autonomous status ended in 2018 when parts of the former federally administered tribal areas known as FATA were merged with Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. And as this map shows, it is here in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa where most of the TTP's activities have been concentrated since 2021. It has not significantly carried out attacks outside the province, and at least not on the same scale as we saw earlier. Next slide, please. So digging a bit deeper into the TTP's theater of activity, within Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, it is in the former FATA region, which has again emerged as the TTP's strongholds. They are represented on this map with stripes. And just a general note on the map, it is the areas which have the darkest shade that have seen the most TTP activity. So this concentration in the newly merged districts, as former FATA is now known, has remained nearly consistent over the years, even as the frequency of TTP attacks has increased exponentially. So 40% of the group's overall activity since 2021 has been in this area. The group has a very visible presence on the ground here. It openly stages roadblocks, conducts patrols, but unlike in the past, it has not yet been able to hold on to any territory. What explains this focus on this region? The region's terrain, geography, and politics all provide fertile ground for militant activity. This is where the TTP was founded in 2007, and its leadership from the Masood tribe shares close ethnic ties with the local population, especially in Waziristan. It is also mountainous and forested terrain, provides ample hideouts for ambushes, hit and run attacks, IED explosions, which is the TTP's main modus operandi. And these areas also border Afghanistan. It is a porous border, well connected with well-established smuggling routes. And it is not just militants, but also weapons that have been left behind after the withdrawal of US and NATO forces that have found their way into Pakistan from across the border. Last year, the TTP reportedly opened new training camps in Afghanistan northeastern provinces, which are highlighted here on the map. And as our data show, the areas within Pakistan that have seen the most TTP activity border these provinces within Afghanistan, where the new training camps have opened. An interesting aspect of this focus of the TTP in this area is that the TTP is not the only actor here. There are other militant groups, mainly the Islamic State, Khorasan province, and the Hafiz Gul Bahadur group. But interactions with these groups do not contribute significantly to the rise in militant activity. Intergroup and factional violence constitutes less than 1% of the TTP's overall activity, despite all of these groups being in direct competition with each other for resources and territorial control recruitment. The TTP is the stronger group, and its accommodation of these other groups really speaks to Emir Masood's desire for unity and to prevent fragmentation among the Islamist militants operating in the area. Now, leveraging its base in the NMDs, the TTP has also significantly expanded its activities in the wider southern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province outside the former FATA region. This is mainly in Bannu, Dera Ismail Khan, and Lucky Merwat districts. And the southern part of the province now accounts for nearly 60% of all TTP violence since 2021. These are strategically important provinces because of their location. They sit at the crossroads of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, Punjab, and Balochistan. And because of this location, well-established drug trafficking routes and networks are already operational here. So the TTP has sought to tap into those networks to boost its recruitment. And by expanding activities here, it is also well positioned to expand geographically into Pakistan's other provinces. Next slide, please. So that was more on where the TTP operates, but moving on to its tactics in its latest iteration. In 2018, the TTP leadership issued new rules of engagement. These had a concerted focus on targeting security forces and avoiding indiscriminate attacks against civilians. This stemmed from a belief that its previous bout of indiscriminate attacks, such as the one in Army Public School, Peshawar, contributed to a loss in popular support and ultimately in the success of military operations. So we had a close look at the data to see if their rhetoric of restraint matches the situation on the ground. And what we found was a more complicated scenario. So it is true that the overwhelming majority of the TTP's activities target security forces. In 2021 and 2022 combined, this was more than three-fourths of all TTP activity. But from 2023 onwards, there has been a marked shift with an increase in targeted violence against civilians. You can see that in the bar chart here, where the red shows attacks against civilians. In pure numbers, this violence increased more than 11-fold between 2021 and 2024, but its share in overall TTP activity has also more than doubled. So it's a mixed bag with strategic violence against civilians increasingly supplementing attacks against security forces. And what does this violence against civilians look like? So this violence is tactical rather than indiscriminate. It is mainly directed at those associated with formal and informal governance structures. The TTP employs a loose definition of who counts as a combatant. So it regards attacks against judges, members of the ruling elite, tribal elders, off-duty security personnel, all as legitimate. And this donut chart identifies the TTP's main civilian targets. As you can see, off-duty security personnel, the overwhelming majority of whom are from the police, are the biggest targets. This has really generated wariness among the serving personnel, and they last year staged rare protests in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa against the rise in targeted violence against them. A close second is attacks against what we could loosely call the state apparatus. So this includes politicians, civil servants, but also attacks on key infrastructure, such as schools, clinics, telecoms, and energy infrastructure. These attacks are highly destabilizing, especially as some of these regions are anyway quite underdeveloped. And tribal elders who wield enormous influence in these areas have also been attacked. An important caveat is that these attacks have not been on the same scale as when the TTP first rose to power, when hundreds were killed. Its attacks this time have been more limited in comparison. It has selectively targeted those deemed particularly hostile to the group or alleged state collaborators. And its broader strategy through such attacks appears to be to undermine the state's writ, its authority, and to promote a sense of governance vacuum. Now, attacks against formal and informal power structures obviously further this, but so does the not insignificant number of attacks which we've labeled as other. Here, civilians have either been harmed accidentally as casualties in landmine or IED explosions, or killed without a clearly identifiable motive. This lack of a discernible motive for some killings further contributes to a sense of, in general, insecurity in the region. And it is within this vacuum that the TTP may hope to step in. So it is already positioning itself as an alternative center of power by highlighting Pashtun nationalism and Pashtun grievances in its propaganda. It has also sought to publicly negotiate with some tribal groups. So it wants to show that it is a reasonable party which is attuned to the concerns of locals and is willing to partake in local justice customs. It has a dual strategy. On the one hand, undermining the state's authority, and on the other hand, amping up its own willingness to fill in the gap. So where does all of this leave Pakistan and what lies ahead? Next slide, please. There are no easy choices, and Zia can speak more on it, but the security situation is precarious, and the loss in lives, particularly of security personnel, is already so high that it may prove to be unsustainable. Just earlier this week, at least 16 soldiers were killed in a single ambush by TTP militants, and it just goes to show the immense risks faced by security personnel in the region. However, a comprehensive military operation like Zarb-e-Azab remains unpopular among locals. It previously resulted in massive displacements, and locals have also accused the military of committing a range of serious human rights violations, from enforced disappearances to killings under the pretext of anti-militancy operations. There is also, more importantly, no political consensus on how to tackle this threat. The provincial government has time and again publicly broken rank with the national government and the military's positions, at different times calling for greater involvement of the Afghan Taliban and even negotiations with the TTP. And with the appointment of the new CM, we can expect the differences to widen. So what we may end up seeing as a compromise are more smaller scale localized operations as recently launched in Bajor, but without a sustained military presence and boots on the ground to maintain tactical gains, the militants may find it easy to return once the immediate threat subsides. And it remains to be seen whether such operations will be successful eventually. At the same time, two relatively recent developments in 2025 show that civilians are likely to find themselves increasingly drawn into conflict. The first is an increased involvement of armed local militias. Now, these militias have been formed directly by the locals in organic opposition to the military, to the TTP, sorry. And unlike the state-sponsored militias of the past, there is no formal oversight over them. What this means is, without such oversight, abuses of power remain a very real threat. And without any protection, local communities remain particularly vulnerable to retaliation by the militants. Another development is the significant increase in the use of drones to carry out attacks by both sides. These are imprecise tactics, particularly in the hands of militants who are still experimenting with the use of quadcopter drones and carry huge risks in terms of civilian casualties. Their use by military forces in the same region that faced the devastating consequences of drone strikes during the US NATO war against terror will only serve to further increase opposition to the presence of the military and their activities here. And so both of these developments are worrying and they point towards greater instability in the region.
Thank you, Pearl, for unpacking the strategic shifts that have underpinned the TTP's revival and the Pakistan military's subsequent response. I'd like to now turn to you, Zia. You have long followed Pakistani politics and done much reporting from KPK, having most recently written a report in the New York Times exploring the security implications of the TTP's resurgence. So I ask you, what is the situation like on the ground, and what are the challenges that Pakistan faces as it responds to a resurgent TTP?
Thank you, Tim. Pearl, I think discussed most of the part what's going on the ground with the help of data, which is actually to a very good way. So yeah, all data and trends mentioned by the accurate report are perfect. The areas in KP, particularly the former tribal areas in southern districts, they are mostly affected by the TTP violence. Not only TTP, by other two groups like group led by Hafiz Group Badr. And we have seen that the Pakistani security forces and police personnel, as well as tribal elders who are helping the government in the crackdown, they are basically the most target. And one thing we have noticed that unlike the past, like 10 years ago, the TTP now claim that they are avoiding to attack civilians. It is a trend they learned from Afghan Taliban. We have also seen that in the past that in the Afghan Taliban in the past used to attack civilians, but there was a strategy that they stopped civilians. It is because that this one specific attack in December 2014 on a school in Peshawar, in which over 140 children were killed. It was a very most important event in this Taliban militancy when this incident basically shook entire country. And there was a big consensus by the political parties, civil society, media against the TTP, and it basically laid foundation of the success of Zarb-e-Azab in 2014. So now TTP tried to, they claim that we don't attack civilians, but if you see in some attacks, for example, there was one attack a few years back in a mosque in Peshawar, in which they killed 100 worshippers. It was policeman most, but most of people were not policemen. And when this attack happened, they don't claim, the TTP don't claim it. So it is also their strategy not to claim in which civilian has been killed. They also tried to attack policemen guarding polio vaccinators because they're really most vulnerable because they're guarding these women and men guarding the anti-polio medics. And they know that if we target them, it will make a news. So the polio vaccinators and the policemen guarding them, they're also targets of the TTP. One more things on the ground we have seen in recent past, it is extortion. Like since August 2021, they are extorting traders in KP to a great extent. They're calling them with Afghan telephone numbers. They have these organized local criminal groups which provide the TTP militants in Kunad and Garhar and other hosts. They provide their wealth and the details of their relatives, and they threaten them to pay the extortion. It is one of the key things we observe in our reporting in KP that most of the people are forced to pay extortion. If they're not paying money, so their families are they will be targeted. Is another very very distressing thing in Peshawar particularly, and because of it, most of people are basically relocating their businesses from one part to another part. So yeah, it is basically the main ground situation in the KP, particularly in the former tribal areas and in the southern districts. Yes.
Thank you, Zia, for your comments there about what we are seeing there on the ground. We also, we've got multiple other questions that have come through during the call and some that we have beforehand. And I'd also invite, again, people to drop more questions in the Q&A section if there's anything else that you would like our panelists to discuss. So first off, Zia, I wanted to touch on some things that were raised during Pearl's presentation. So what are you seeing as the government's key challenges in countering the current resurgence of the TTP? And how did Pakistan manage to address the issues back in 2024, and why is it struggling to do so now?
Yeah, if we compare the today's situation with 2014, when the Operation Zarb-e-Azab was launched, one thing is clear that the attacks in number they could be higher, but in lethality there's not so much lethal. For example, if we see the number of suicide bombing, it has been reduced. At that time they were targeting markets, football matches, mosques, but this time we have seen that they are not able to carry out more suicide attacks like they were doing it. But if we compare it, so I will basically there is 5 major things if we compare it with the 2014. At that time, because of this school attack in Peshawar, it was Army Public School, after which there was a big political consensus between all political parties, including the PTI, which led by the former Prime Minister Imran Khan and currently rule the KP. This time we don't see this political consensus. It is missing because of these political differences, because Imran Khan party, he was removed from the office in 2022, and after it we have seen that there's more political clashes. And yesterday we saw that the removal of the chief minister of the province in these things. The second thing is also the backlash from the locals, because they are because at that time there was big displacement happened because of Zarb-e-Azab. And it is the reason that military or government also realized that if we carry out big operation, 10,000 people will be displaced. So it's the reason that if you see the Bajor, they launch a very small level operation in specific bordering districts, villages, in which they ask people to relocate to the major city of the Bajor, Khar, and there are like around 35 villages, and they're clearing one by one and sending people back. So because they learned from the 2014 that because of this big displacement, it will be big political backlash from the locals, from these peace collectives in the KP and the uh, other parts of the KP. The second thing was basically the US support really helped the Pakistani military and government at that time, because most of the TTP leaders are central chief all killed by the US drone attacks, whether in Pakistan or Afghanistan. And they also like there was big joint counterterrorism cooperation between the two. They were sharing intelligence, they were sharing other things. But we've seen that after the withdrawal of the forces from Afghanistan in August 2021, we have seen this decrease of this cooperation. Recently, we have seen again revival of these ties between the US and Islamabad, particularly on the security front. The third thing was the current economic situation. At that time, Pakistan economic situation was a little bit good because counterterrorism thing is very expensive. They need money, and you know that Pakistan condition is very economic condition is bad. We are basically taking loan from IMF, so it's also the main of one of the key reasons. The fourth thing is at that time, the TTP were mainly headquartered in specific areas like North Waziristan. Everyone knew that whether it's TTP, Haqqani network, everyone is headquartered in this specific area. So it was very easy for the government and the military to target these hideouts through aerial bombardment and anything. But this time, they have been spread and they have basically found sanctuaries across the border in Afghanistan, mainly in Kunal, Nangarhar, and Host, from where the leadership are sitting. And the fifth one is after the Taliban takeover, they have found like a you can say a big support base in terms of many things. If we compare it with the former Ashraf Ghani regime, so during the Ashraf Ghani regime, despite the relationship with the Pakistan, they've arrested so many TTP leaders, including Fakir Muhammad, who is now heading TTP Bajor. But when Taliban came, they released hundreds of TTP militants from the jail, number one. Number two, they provided them all uh, modern weaponry and night googles and other things left by the American forces. And third, hideouts, like a everyone know that where they live, tribal areas. So, like for militant from Bajor, Swat, they live in Kunard and Nangarhar. Militant from Waziristan and other areas, they live in Host. So yeah, these are basically five major challenges which Pakistan has been facing to address this insecurity problem this time. Yeah.
You mentioned in your comments just then, Zia, that the ability to kind of have a clear understanding of where the TTP is based is less clear than it was previously. We've had a question that kind of asks about the wider security implications. So not just KPK itself, but also more broadly. And the questioner asks, is there any sign of some kind of collaboration or accommodation with Balochi armed groups in particular? So looking at that expansion outside of KPK, maybe Pearl, I might start off just asking you what ACLED data has to say about this.
Yes, sure. So coincidentally, Baloch separatism has also risen at around the same time as the TTP's resurgence, and there's always talk about whether these groups are collaborating, how much in contact they are. We don't have many open signs of collaboration, but reports suggest that they are sharing some training camps in Afghanistan. It appears to be more tactical rather than a more organized way of collaboration. Obviously, their ideologies are all completely different. One, Baloch separatism is a secular separatist movement, whereas the TTP's insurgency is more focused on, more Islamist in nature. But they have both benefited from the destabilizing impact that the other has created in their respective stronghold. But in terms of the wider security implications, it has also fed into the state's response. So, for a long time during the US war on terror, drone strikes in Balochistan were considered a red line. There was a high profile strike which killed an Afghan Taliban leader, but few documented instances. But what we've seen recently is increased use by Pakistan of drone strikes in Balochistan as it finds or hopes to replicate some success there, learning from its experience in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. We've also had some Baloch groups, factions actually join the TTP, and the TTP has established a new wilaya in Balochistan. But beyond that, the collaboration is not as strong as people have been talking about it.
And I think that kind of more widely speaks to the complexity of these border regions in terms of armed groups. Zia, we actually have a question specifically referring to Islamic State. Do TTP members have tribal links with ISKP members? And have there been any clashes between the two groups? The question is asking essentially, what do their dynamics look like today?
Okay, so one thing is we know that the Afghan Taliban and the Islamic State are ISKP ties are not good. Okay, because ISKP pose greater challenge to Afghanistan current regime of Taliban. They believe it that now Afghan Taliban has become state, and now we are the last remaining global jihadi network. But if in terms of TTP and ISKP, we don't see any infighting between them. Okay, number one. Number two, basically, it was the TTP militants who formed ISKP in 2015. And also, they lived together in Kunad, in Nangarhar, when they were displaced, are forcibly pushed to the Afghanistan after the Zarb-e-Azam. So we don't see any proper collaboration between the two groups because TTP is more allied to Al Qaeda in Afghan Taliban. But we didn't see any like a confrontation or any like infighting between the two. For example, we have seen in Bajor both groups operate openly, but we didn't see any infighting between them. And it's also like a major reservation among the Taliban ranks that if we crack down on TTP under the pressure of Islamabad, so some of the TTP militant might join ISKP, which could challenge their regime in Kabul. So yeah.
To that point specifically, we've had some questions just looking at the connection between the Afghan Taliban and TTP. You mentioned kind of the fear of potentially any crackdowns on the TTP leading to escalations in recruitment for ISKP. How does the Afghan Taliban then balance that with kind of relations with Pakistan? Have we been seeing anything on that front?
Yeah, if you see last 4 years, 7 August 2021, we have seen that relationship between the Kabul and Islamabad has been like a very bad situation, particularly when TTP carry out any big attack on the security forces on the bordering districts. Then you see that a big reaction came from Islamabad. We have recently seen a major steps taken by the Pakistan, like for example, expulsion of Afghan refugees, tightening Pak-Afghan trade, and also airstrikes inside the Afghanistan territory to target suspected TTP or after the Gurbadir hideouts. The issue is that Pakistan believe that if Afghan Taliban want, they can stop TTP from attacks. They give example that there are many militants operating in Afghanistan, for example, IMU, like Uzbek militants, and ETIM, like Uyghur militants, but we have only seen attacks from the TTP in Pakistan. The other group are not attacking in their countries. But when you talk to Afghan Taliban and what is their perspective, they, as I said, that they believe that if we, they believe that because we were part of larger jihadi network at that time led by Al Qaeda. If we try to take any action against TTP, first there will be big split among the Taliban ranks because most of the Afghan Taliban lower level militant believe that we are basically we fought for 20 years not for bringing ruling Afghanistan. We have to bring these so-called Sharia in different parts of the world, including Pakistan. Second, if we push TTP, their militants might join ISKP, which is basically uh, uh, in their publication and propaganda, they are attracting these TTP militants. They're saying that, okay, Afghan Taliban came to power because of the arrangement with the US and these things. So it is one of the main key reasons that Afghan Taliban are reluctant to take any action, despite there's much pressure from China, Russia, Pakistan. Recently, we have seen this Moscow format conference, but despite it, and second very important thing is Al Qaeda. So, because after the Doha Agreement, Afghan Taliban agreed with the US that we will not allow any foreign militant outfit. But we have seen that the killing of Emil Zawahiri in very highly secured area of Kabul, and after which we have seen that many Al Qaeda local affiliates in Pakistan they joined TTP, like at least two groups joined TTP. If you see their entire propaganda tools, you can see the AQIS like a model in these things. So it seems that because to evade pressure on Afghan Taliban from the US and the Western countries, let Al Qaeda also like merge itself in TTP as a part of their strategy. Yeah.
Actually, we did get a question previously, looking at kind of the transnational threat. During the previous war on terror, obviously, into Pakistan, the US played an important role there, as per flagged during our presentation. We have a question which is, does the current resurgence of the TTP pose a potential threat to US national security? And I would ask more widely, is the TTP positioning itself as a transnational threat in the way it was previously?
Yeah, it's a very interesting, important question. TTP has been insisting in their publication there were not any transnational military threat to any Western interest. But as I said to you that if you see that many Al Qaeda affiliates, at least two, they have joined the ranks of TTP. It could be a strategy of this Al Qaeda led larger jihadi alliance in Afghanistan and Pakistan, just to show that okay, like we are not posing any threat to the West, particularly to the US. But it depends on the time because once we have seen that the TTP has reached to as far as the New York bombing there, so it is a reason that the US Pakistan ties has been revived. One for the ISKP thing because it poses very transnational threats after its attacks in Russia and in Iran. And second is also like the Al Qaeda TTP linkages.
Considering what you're saying about the lack of kind of transnational aspect to it, Pearl, we've had a question asking back kind of in Pakistan more broadly. So the question is asked, what is the significance of TTP's systematic hierarchy, shadow government all over Pakistan, an intelligence arm, what they call the Taliban intelligence agency, and kind of what's its significance in the TTP's recent resurgence?
Yes, thank you. It is of huge significance. Their human intelligence network and local routes allow them to map convoy patterns, carry out these ambushes, hit and run attacks. And it's also what the systematic hierarchy or shadow government means is that they are sleeper cells, are decentralized cells within Pakistan. So even if the military makes tactical gains, takes out a commander or two, they are able to quickly regroup and get directions reportedly from their leadership in Afghanistan. But this decentralized nature sort of makes it a bit immune to these temporary gains that the military might be making.
And does that see it operate in a different manner to other armed groups that we're seeing in Pakistan? We've got a specific question here. Is there any difference in the tactics between the TTP and other groups operating in the region?
Yeah, that's very interesting, actually. So the tactics are different, and our data show the clear difference. The TTP's main targets and overwhelming activity are against state forces. Islamic State carries out a lot of suicide bombings and explosive attacks against civilians, which the latter forms a greater part of their activity than they do for the TTP. The targets are also different. So, as Zia mentioned, the Islamic State has gone after sectarian religious minorities and targeted sort of Hazara, Shia, even Sikh traders in Peshawar and Quetta. So we see these differences in tactics, and the TTP, when it regrouped, established a very high bar for suicide attacks. So they saw how unpopular they were, and their rules of engagement clearly say that any suicide attack needs sign off from their top leadership. Often does not meet out in practice, but that is the bar that they have set. And the Peshawar police lines mosque, a suicide attack that Zia mentioned earlier as well, we saw a faction of the TTP then go out and claim responsibility for it, but the group itself distanced itself. So there is both a difference in tactics and a difference in how they want to portray themselves to the people, which would impact their recruitment, their support, and how they are perceived in the region.
Yeah, I will add, Tim, something about the ISKP thing. So ISKP targets are very diverse. Is uh, for example, they also target all major political parties because of their anti-democracy stance. Number one, they attack all religious scholars and madrasas who are close to Afghan Taliban. They also target all police officers, government officials. They also target religious minorities, not only non-Muslim but also like Shias and Barelvis and also them. So their thing is very diverse. They also if you see their propaganda every time they are criticizing one group and another group. So recently we have seen that they clashed with the Baloch separatists. They criticize. So this specific attacks clashes between the Baloch separatists and ISKP. It also shows that it comes to your previous question that whether there is any ties between the TTP and the BLA. So it also showed that there was some sort of cooperation between the BLA and ISKP. Okay, and then there were some differences in, and they therefore they gone after the ISKP. So in Balochistan, we have seen some cooperation between the BLA and TTP. We have seen it in one typical Pashtun areas, which comes under the TTP influence, and they allowed BLA to carry out attack and collect extortion from the mine owners. Similarly, we have seen that in Panjgur, TTP operates. So it shows that they are not ideological partners, but it is their strategy to support each other in their anti-state activities to some extent. Yes.
Pearl, are we seeing any of that that collaborative effort in some ways, finding its way into the data and kind of the activity that we see with these armed groups?
A lot of this is behind the scenes. What we have seen are some joint attacks with the TTP and the Hafiz Gul Bahadur group, the IMP, now under the IMP. Not as many with in our data yet with the IS with TTP and ISKP, or with TTP and the BLA, but we do obviously have the clash with Islamic State militants and Baloch separatists in Mastung earlier this year, but direct cooperation is also limited.
think it's one thing that's quite interesting in a lot of what you guys have discussed here and has come through with some of the questions is obviously this success that the TTP has had vis-a-vis the military of not positioning itself as the bad guys in the same way as they had potentially previously. So there's been a couple of questions looking at kind of grassroots efforts or kind of potential for development activity in the border regions to combat that. So one particular question we have here is that I would like to ask that do the panelists think that solely a state-centric approach to tackle the issue of TTP is enough? Shouldn't there be more grassroots efforts and approaches towards conflict transformation rather than conflict resolution in the short term? I might pass this across to you, Zia.
Yeah, I think there was some efforts. For example, the merger of the tribal areas into Pakistan. It was one thing that because there was a very famous speech of then American President Obama, and it said that the Pakistan tribal areas are one of the dangerous place on the earth. So we have seen that after the success of Operation Survey in 2018, Pakistan merged these tribal areas into mainstream Pakistan. They abolished this century-old colonial law, and they enforce all new things. But issue is that the process was so slow, and after three years, we have seen that Taliban capture Afghanistan and TTP revived again. So entire FATA merger things has been slowed. I think it was one thing that we can say that Pakistan tried at that time. And recently also that after the closure of the USAID by the Trump administration, there was a big project going on by the USAID in tribal areas, particularly for these conflict resolution and the resolution of land disputes, particularly in Kuram Agency, where yesterday the attack occurred near the Kuram Agency or Oxy Agency. So I think Pakistan cannot do it alone. Like it was a very there should be some international support to Pakistan in this regard, particularly in this like a CVE thing against TTP and other militant groups. Yeah.
And I think when it comes to grassroots efforts or sort of winning hearts and minds, the political disenchantment around last year's elections before it hasn't helped matters. I think when you need to take the local population with you, you need to engage with them politically, and Pakistan has unfortunately cracked down on some of the more peaceful civil society groups working in the region. So the Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, which is the biggest of the Pashtun advocacy groups, was banned under national security laws, and that's limited avenues for how people can peacefully express their grievances, which has also played or impeded the grassroots efforts.
Is this something that we're seeing translating into any recruitment related drives from the TTP? So we've got a question here for you, Zia. With the surge of TTP violence, and I'd also say with some of these government crackdowns that Paul was mentioning, has there been any visible shift in recruitment levels for the TTP and any changes in the ethnic composition of the group? Are there more new recruits or former active militants from other groups?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I recently talking to some people who are working on this. So there are two things. One, when in 2014, when Pakistan threw its Zarb as a military operation, when they pushed this TTP militant, they moved to Afghanistan with their families. So 10 years ago, when they moved with families, so their new children has been born. They are born there. They are now adult. Okay, and they also did some recruitment from the Pakistan tribal areas. But also we have increasingly seen the Afghan Taliban militants also joining the TTP. There was one story in New York Times 2 years ago in which it's showing that in one village in Afghanistan, many militants were killed in Pakistan by the Pakistani military. So there was some condolence going on. So because they believe that at our time TTP helped us in, according to them, expelling US forces from Afghanistan. Now it is our turn to help them. So we also seen the increasingly joining of Afghan militants in TTP ranks. And also you're right that they also new recruiting people from tribal areas, because one thing is they release on one social media accounts the area of their killed militants. It's called Rastem Mohabbat. So it shows that mostly they're people from different parts of KP, like tribal areas, southern districts, and some parts of Balochistan, Pashtun district of Balochistan.
And what about displacement from these kind of areas? Are we seeing more people in recent times with this resurgence moving out of KPK? How and with that, how easy is, sorry, I'm just reading a question. How easy is it for civilians to relocate to other parts of Pakistan? If so, where do they usually move to?
It's not easy because they face uh, longest displacement in 2008, 2009, and 2014. For example, the Mysore tribesmen of South Uzbekistan, they abandoned their villages at least for 4 years. They were living in Tang, Ismail Khan, and as far as Karachi. And it is the reason uh, that this time we have seen in Bajor that this government asked very few villages on the border to vacate it temporarily. So they are not doing the large-scale displacement they did in the 2014. The second thing is the people who are well off, who can afford to move to other cities like Islamabad, Peshawar. So they are moving, but everyone cannot afford because they are poor people, mostly affiliated with the agriculture land. They cannot leave their agriculture land, and so yeah, it's a big challenge to be relocate.
And with this, are we seeing sorry, you mentioned earlier in your talk that most of the victims that we're seeing of the increased civilian targeting by the TTP have been in some way affiliated with the state. We have a question here asking whether there's also been an increase against any local NGOs or civil society. Is that something that's been kind of broadly included in the loose definition of combatants or state infrastructure by the TTP?
Yes, it is. And the TTP's definition itself also includes NGOs, which are obscene. So their classification is any NGO or civil society organization involved in obscenity or propagating obscenity is a legitimate target. They have rather conveniently not defined what is the threshold for obscenity. So many come under this definition. But having said that, in our data so far, there haven't been many such attacks on NGOs or civil society organizations. They've mainly been on the government, civil servants, and polio workers, as Zia was mentioning. So those have been the bigger targets than NGOs operating in the region. But
Do
there
we
are the other, sorry.
No, sorry, go.
But the other issues, as again Zia mentioned about underfunding and US aid cuts, those have also curtailed NGOs' operational space and activity. So that has had if there aren't any targets, then the TTP has fewer targets to go after.
So Zia, are we seeing kind of a contraction of the civil space in KPK with these dual effects that Pearl was mentioning?
Yeah, in the past, we have seen big attacks on the INGOs, particularly in Mansehra and other. There were one big suicide attack in Bajor on World Food Program. But this time is because there is no much presence of NGOs or INGOs in tribal areas or like open. So they basically working through government in KP. But also they also operate in very secure mechanism. So we didn't see much attack, but obviously like for them the word NGOs or civil society, it means that they believe it, that they could be spying like these things. So yeah, they're also like a potential targets.
we're coming up to the end of our time, so I was wondering if we could just get some wrap-up comments, perhaps from both of you. We have one question here that I think kind of speaks to a lot of what you've already discussed, but also provides an opportunity to wrap up this call. Considering the TTP's increasing activities in Pakistan, what measures could Pakistan take to regain security control over the situation in Pakistan? Feel free, Zia, to start, and then maybe Pearl, you can finish us off.
Yeah, so I think if state, like for example, they should learn what they did in 2014. Okay, it was basically a political consensus. Number one, so they start uh, talking to stakeholders like political parties, Islamist parties, civil society, these rights movements, media, just to establish some sort of some like a consensus. Second thing is that which helped them a lot. It was basically support from outside, like in terms of intelligence, funding, for example, like a good example, one policeman is performing his duty in night with very simple guns, and one TTP militant from miles away from using night googles and these modern weapons, they're attacking him. It's a major reason of rise in the killing of policemen because of this modern weaponry. I think there are many ways in which there should be some support to Pakistani government in this regard. Yeah. And again, consensus. And third, there should be some dialogue to press like a Taliban administration, because now they are state. They are not now because everyone is talking to them like a dealing them as a state. So I think uh, per, persuading them or convincing them is also will be a big solution.
Zia covered most of it, but yes, any action or any gains against the TTP would necessarily involve engagement with the Afghan Taliban and their cooperation. But just to, much has been made recently of the recent bonhomie between America and Pakistan and what impact might that have. That's something we could end on, is that they could provide actionable intelligence, and we have seen cooperation between America and Pakistan related to ISKP, which the West, I think, generally regards as a threat to their interests. The TTP is seen more of as a national issue for Pakistan, which has limited cooperation or support for them on this. So more of that specific security measures that Pakistan would benefit from is more resources and equipment for the paramilitary and the police, who are the front line of defense in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, along with the broader political negotiations and engagement initiatives. All of this would have to work together if Pakistan were to regain security control over the situation.
Unfortunately, that is all we have time for. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you both to Pearl and Zia for your great work and your insightful comments. I highly encourage everyone here to check out Pearl's recent report, and you can do that via the links in the chat, as well as Zia's extensive reporting from the ground. We hope you found this discussion fruitful and look forward to you joining us at a future webinar. Thank you.